Warlord Games is getting ready to release version 3 of their popular World War II game Bolt Action, and today we're going to learn how to play it. Alright, Bolt Action is a random activation 28mm World War II game produced by Warlord Games. Today I'm going to attempt to teach you how to play with some examples from the tabletop. Okay, like most war games we play, you're going to want a tape measure to measure distances, some dice, in this case d6, some templates and markers to represent pins, order dice which are specific to bolt action, although you could use d6 for these as well, and a dice bag. You will obviously also need some miniatures and terrain. We're going to start with some basic principles for measuring distances between models, and that is measured from the base of one model to the base of another. If a model does not have a base, use the hull, gun breech, or the core portion of the model. Ignore parts like gun barrels and outstretched arms or weapons. As a note, if weapon teams or artillery teams are multi-based on one base for ease of use, pretend each soldier is on a 25mm base and ignore the larger base they are on. There is no pre-measuring before making a decision in bolt action. You must always declare your intentions before measuring. Next, we have line of sight, which is determined by true line of sight from the model. Friendly and enemy infantry and artillery units do not block line of sight. You would not be able to see through a tank, however. We'll cover terrain more shortly, but you always want to discuss with your opponent what terrain is on the battlefield before playing. A note to keep in mind is line of sight is determined from the model, so terrain may block line of sight for some members in the same unit. Last, we'll cover coherency and the 1-inch gap. When moving a unit, the soldiers need to stay in formation. That means as you move them across the battlefield, they need to stay within an inch of each other. In addition, you must keep units 1 inch away from other units, friend or foe, unless charging an enemy, which we'll cover in just a bit. With those key concepts in mind, let's take a look at the turn. The turn is pretty simple. You have an orders phase and an end of turn phase. In the orders phase, an order die will be drawn at random from the bag. The player that corresponds to the order die is able to activate one of their units. If necessary, the unit may need to take an order test, which we'll cover in a moment. After resolving any actions the unit can take, we go back to drawing dice until the turn ends. In the end phase, all order dice are returned to the bag except for ambush or down orders if the player wishes. Those can stay on the table if the player chooses. We'll cover all the orders in a moment, but a quick note, if a unit is destroyed, you will remove their order die even if they haven't activated and it's still in the bag. Each order die represents a single unit. All of the orders are on the screen, and we're going to cover each one in detail. Before we do, let's talk about pin markers. Pin markers measure how much troops are being affected by fire on the battlefield. Every time a unit is fired at by an enemy unit and suffers at least one hit, a pin marker is applied. Note that if later in the turn the unit suffers another hit from a different unit, an additional pin marker would apply. In some cases, heavy weapons can apply multiple pin markers. A pin marker can also be added from any kind of friendly fire should it happen. Pinning a unit affects their morale and any order test it takes. Each pin on a unit reduces the morale by 1, so if a regular infantry unit has a morale of 9, 2 pin markers would make that morale 7. If a unit is ever reduced to 0 morale, it is routed and removed from the board. Pinning also makes it harder for that unit to fire weapons efficiently and affects order tests. Order tests are taken if a unit is activated and it has pin markers. If no pin markers are present, the order is automatically passed and executed. Each pin marker on the unit, however, reduces their ability to receive orders. After selecting a unit to activate, if it has a pin marker, roll 2d6 and compare the result with the unit's modified morale value. For example, this group of American Rangers is firing into the Grenadiers. They do have a pin marker reducing the morale by 1. They have to take an order test, and since their morale is normally a 9, it is reduced to an 8, and they have to roll equal to or less than that. It is successful, they remove the pin marker, and they can fire. If they failed, however, they would retain their pin marker, and they would immediately go down. As mentioned, you can have multiple pin markers, and when it comes to bolt action, pinning tends to be winning. A big note here is if you roll a double 6, a foobar takes place. You'll roll on the foobar table and follow the results. The result could be friendly fire or the unit just panicking. Also note a roll of 2 will always pass, a roll of 12 will always fail. Now we discuss a specific order for rally. If a unit is pinned, you may issue a rally order ignoring any modifications for pinning. Roll 2d6 on their normal morale value, and if passed, you will remove all pin markers, but you will not be able to move or fire. You can also show incredible courage by rolling double 1s. If this ever happens, you can discard all pin markers as well. One additional note that full strength is still in the game, so if you have the maximum number of infantry the squad allows, and you fail an order test, you are able to re-roll that at full strength. Once you take a casualty, however, you lose that bonus. Now, I had flashed troop quality and morale on the screen earlier, and the units are broken up into 3 segments. It is worth noting that if your squad leader, your NCO, whatever it may be, is ever taken off the board, then that unit will have a permanent -1 penalty to their morale. Now that we know how to take orders and the effects of pinning, let's look at the orders themselves. A unit can advance, moving up to 6 inches, and have the ability to fire their weapons. Simply measure out 6 inches from your unit and move your team forward, keeping them in formation. A unit can run and move 12 inches, which is also used to assault enemy units. They can change directions at any time, as long as they do not exceed the movement value. You can move through friendly units as long as you remember the 1-inch rule when you get to your final destination, with the exception being tanks. Terrain may affect movement. Impassable is pretty self-explanatory, you can't go there. Another type of terrain is rough ground, like forest or rubble. This slows infantry down to where they can only advance through this type of terrain. Keep that in mind if you're assaulting in terrain, as you can't issue a run and move 12 inches, you would only be able to move 6. There is a chart on page 77 that tells you what units can and can't do in that type of terrain. For example, infantry units can't run over obstacles or in rough ground. Okay, you've moved. Now let's take aim and fire. To shoot, declare your target and allow your target to react. Measure the range and open fire by rolling to hit. You'll roll to damage and allow the target to take any cover saves. They will take any casualties and then check morale if applicable. When a unit shoots, it fires all of its weapons at one target with a small caveat to one-shot weapons, which we'll discuss later. In this example, these regular American airborne are going to fire into the German infantry. The to-hit roll on a base roll is now 4. We declare the target and allow them to react. In this case, they do not react. We find that the rifles in the BAR are in range, but the submachine gun is not. 3 rifles get 1 shot each, and the BAR gets 2, for a total of 5. The Americans do have a special rule that for every 3 riflemen taking shots, they get an extra die to roll. As a note, in this example, if you had models that were unable to see the target, they would be unable to shoot. If we were issued a fire order, it would need 4s to hit. If it wasn't advanced and we moved, it would be 5s to hit, as we would need to take a -1 modifier. For this example, we'll say it's a fire order and we land 3 hits. Speaking of modifiers, we need to discuss those, and modifiers can make it more difficult to hit your target sometimes. If you move with an advance and attempt to fire, for example, it's a -1 penalty to your roll. So that 4 now becomes a 5. If you have a pin marker, it is a -1. And if the fire is inexperienced, it is a -1. If you are at point blank range, which is within 6 inches, you actually get a +2 modifier to your roll. These modifiers are cumulative. Now while I have this shot on the screen, there's one more thing I want to cover. If the Rangers behind were targeting the German infantry, and they were going to shoot past the friendly airborne units, you have to imagine a 1-inch bubble around the airborne's bases. While they can draw line of sight to the German infantry, they can't fire through their own troops. In fact, when they take aim and fire, you can't fire within that 1-inch bubble for risk of hitting your friends. So most of those Rangers would not be able to take shots. As another note, this does not count for tanks. In another example with our airborne, if they had a pen, remember you would have to successfully pass an order test with your modified morale in order to take your action. In our example where we landed hits on the German infantry, remember they will immediately suffer a pen marker from taking hits. Now take your successful hits and roll to damage, and depending on what quality they are depends if they take casualties. Veterans take casualties on a 5-up, regular on a 4, and inexperienced on a 3+. Let's give another example where the US infantry team is inexperienced. They elect to fire into the German unit, and the target is going to react by going down. Going down is an option that you can take if your unit has not activated. Simply pull a die from the bag and place it next to your unit, and this will improve their cover save. Now we normally hit on a 4, but since the unit is inexperienced, it becomes a 5. They also were issued in advance order, so they're on the move, which will be a 6. We still get 2 hits. The Germans are regular, so we need 4s in order to cause damage. We cause 1, and don't forget to give them a pen marker. Let's just say in this example that they both cause damage. Well, the target is then going to be able to take cover saves. Cover saves are allowed when your unit is in soft or heavy cover, or if the unit went down. Going down gives you a 5+ cover save or a +2 modifier if you are behind some type of cover, like these sandbags, which we'll say is hard cover. Simply take the damage that was rolled and roll those out. If this target is in the open, they would need 5s, they didn't get any, so 2 models would be removed as casualties. If the infantry were behind hard cover, such as these sandbags, they would get a 4-up save, but because they went down, they would get +2 to that save, giving them a 2+ cover save. That means the German player will only lose a model on the roll of a 1. Cover saves are new to bolt action, and remember, it's very important to discuss with your opponent what each terrain piece is going to be, whether it's hard or soft cover. Soft cover, such as being in the woods and dense vegetation or maybe behind a wooden fence, is a 5+ save. Being behind hard cover, such as rubble or ruined buildings and sandbags, is a 4+ save. And going down will give you a 5+ save or a +2 modifier to any cover save you may currently have. There is one small caveat to that. If you're firing at point blank range, that +2 modifier for being down on your cover save does not count. So since we're talking about cover, how do we know that a target is in cover? Well, just use the 50% rule. If less than half of your models taking shots can draw a clear line of fire to at least half of the enemy models, the target unit is in cover. If you're in dense terrain, if 50% of the unit is in it, the unit is considered in cover. If you're shooting from cover, if at least 50% of your models are firing from directly behind a wall or on the edge of the woods, they all count as firing as normal. The last thing that we have to do is check for morale, and if you took at least half or more casualties from a single attack from a unit, roll 2d6 and apply any pen markers to their morale. If passed, the unit fights as normal. If failed, the unit routes off the board. Next, let's take a look at ambush, and remember, a unit placed in ambush can be held that way from turn to turn. A unit in ambush can interrupt an enemy move to shoot at it. The player simply declares their unit is opening fire during or when the move is complete. The ambush die is flipped to fire, and shooting is resolved as we just covered. As a note, the target can never react to an ambush fire, so they can't go down. Also note that if a unit in ambush is fired at, they may still elect to go down by flipping their order die that way. Obviously, they will no longer be in ambush. Okay, now we know how to move, shoot, ambush, go down, rally, but what about getting into close quarters with an assault? We covered that to make an assault, you issue the unit a run order. Declare your target, then measure the move distance. The target may react, then you move assaulting models and fight. A unit must be able to see its target or the building it occupies. If you go to measure between the 2 closest models and you're out of range, you'll still move them as far as you can, but you have to obey the 1-inch rule. If you're assaulting over an obstacle or in rough ground, you can only move 6 inches instead of 12. When the target reacts here, they will more than likely open fire if they haven't activated. No order test is ever needed for this one. Remove a die from the bag and give them a fire order. As a note, if the charge started within 6 inches, you can't do this unless you're already in ambush. If the fire wasn't enough to drive the assault off, move the assaulting models into contact. In this example, the Americans hit 3 times, so they would then roll to damage, and let's say the Germans are regular, they cause 1 casualty. As long as the closest models can make it in, all models from the assaulting unit can be placed into contact. You can distribute the models as far as possible to touch enemy bases as equally as possible. Then the enemy closes in with the models of their own. Sometimes you may be fighting over a fence or obstacle. If that's the case, just move your models into contact with the obstacle. The target unit will then engage up the obstacle and defend it. Once we complete the move, both sides are going to roll to damage. No pin values, no cover, no pin markers apply. Roll on the table we discussed previously, with inexperienced needing a 3-up, regular a 4-up, and veteran 5-up. Calculate the combat with all models from both sides fighting at the same time, then remove casualties from both sides. The loser is destroyed. If you're fighting over an obstacle, which we mentioned, the defender has a chance to ready themselves. In this case, the defender will strike first, removing any casualties before the attacker can strike with what is remaining. In the example above, let's say that the Americans are regular and they're hit on 4s, and the Germans land 3 hits. The Americans are allowed to swing back, and they land 2 hits of their own. The Germans would win this combat, and the Americans would be destroyed. Now, if the Germans had charged into this obstacle and the Americans leapt up to defend it, then the Americans would have the opportunity to go first. Let's say that they are fighting regular Germans, so needing 4s to cause casualties, and they get 3. They will remove 3 of the German fighters, only leaving 1 to strike back. In this example, defending the obstacle has worked to the Americans' advantage, and they're going to be allowed to roll a d6 and regroup 6 inches. So that's the basics of bolt action, but we are going to discuss some other rules you'll frequently use in the game, as well as some weapons. Starting with officers, your officers on the field confer a morale bonus. A platoon commander, like a 1st or 2nd lieutenant, will give units a +2 morale bonus within 6 inches. They also perform 2 extra orders, which we'll discuss. A company commander, like a captain or major, doubles these stats, providing a 4+ morale bonus to all units within 12 inches and gets 4 extra orders. Keep in mind, a unit's morale can never go higher than 11. A 12 result will always fail tests. Now, these officers can make men snap to action. When receiving an order die, they can immediately take an additional dice out of the bag and activate units. For a 2nd lieutenant, for example, he can immediately take 2 of their order dice from the bag and give them to friendly units within 6 inches. This is one thing you can measure before doing. Note that a platoon commander can't issue orders to other platoon commanders, so you can't daisy chain. They also can't perform a snap 2 if the officer performs a down order. In a bigger example, a company commander can take up to 4 dice out of the bag, as he has a range of 12 inches. While company commanders can issue orders to platoon commanders, these platoon commanders can't daisy chain off them for more actions. In doing this, resolve the officer's actions first, then each unit in turn, finishing their activation completely. Now let's take a look at special rules for snipers. Snipers has the team weapon rule, meaning if a sniper is killed, the spotter can pick up his weapon and continue operating it with a -1 hit penalty. This unit would also suffer the -1 morale penalty for the loss of a leader. When firing as a sniper, the rifle changes to 36 inches, but anything within 12 inches will automatically miss. The shot gets a +1 to hit, and any hits go straight to damage, with a +1 benefit against infantry and artillery. No cover. If the hit and damage are successful, the firing player can pick the squad leader as the target. You'll continue to see Stubborn in the game, which ignores negative morale modifiers for pin markers. Remember that order tests are not morale checks. Tank Hunters, if that unit wins an assault and scores damage against an armored vehicle, the effect will be resolved on the damage results table rather than the superficial damage. That's something I think we'll discuss in a later video. You'll also see Tough Fighters. They get to re-roll failed damage rolls in combat against infantry and artillery. You can reference any updated special rules on page 129 of the rulebook. In this video, we are briefly going to touch on artillery and vehicles. We'll go more in depth on those, I think, in a later video. But for ranges, just know that it is measured from the center of the gun or the breech on artillery. And many weapons can be fired in various ways, such as direct, where you could not fire through your own troops, versus indirect, where you would be firing over the top of them, lobbing shells across the battlefield. What I want you to know for artillery is for movement, unless otherwise specified, light and medium artillery is moved with run orders, but only moves 6 inches instead of 12. Heavy and super heavy guns, as well as lighter guns whose crew is reduced to a single man, cannot run. Lastly, we'll touch on vehicles such as tanks, and they take orders just like any other units on the table. Some may be open-topped or soft skins. They will take pins like normal, but fully enclosed armored vehicles can't be pinned by small arms fire with no pin value. I have not discussed pin or penetration values that some weapons may have. Larger weapons, heavy machine guns have a pin value, but if you're a veteran, for example, if you're hit with something that has a pin value and normally it takes a 5 for you to suffer damage, that would be reduced to a 4 or whatever that penetration value may be. You'll often find weapons with penetration values on tanks, and therefore they are better at penetrating enemy armor. For vehicle movement, they can advance and run. Most tracked vehicles move forward up to 9 inches, while wheeled vehicles move up to 12 inches with an advance. You can pivot at any point during this move up to 90 degrees twice. These pivots can even be combined to turn 180 degrees. A vehicle can reverse up to half its speed when ordered in advance, and the 2 pivots are still allowed. Vehicles may run, which represents full speed. Tracked vehicles, they can go up to 18 inches, and wheeled vehicles up to 24 inches. You must move at least half of that speed. Also, at any point during this move, you can make a single pivot up to 90 degrees. We will get more into tanks, the arsenal they carry, and how they can damage other vehicles, as well as infantry, I think, in a follow-up video. There's going to be additional rules for everything that you can think of. Tanks in combat with infantry, transports, towing guns. There's even rules for buildings and how to fight in them and between them. This is all covered in the full rulebook, but I hope I've given you enough to get started with bolt action. The full rulebook contains scenarios, how to build your forces, units to effectively use your forces, and special rules. I hope you're excited for the latest offering of bolt action. You'll be seeing battle reports appear on our channel as we gear up for version 3. Well, hey, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this intro guide to Bolt Action version 3. If you liked it, be sure to show your support for the channel by leaving a thumbs up down below. If you did catch any errors or things that I got wrong, be sure to leave a comment, as I will pin those, and then people that reference the video can reference the comments for any mistakes or fixes that need to be applied. Supporters Club, your names are on the screen now. I ask for absolutely nothing. If you've watched the video this far, you've done more than enough to support the channel. So once again, thank you so much. We will see you in the next one. Take care.